We hate because we're taught to hate. We hate because we're ignorant.
Perspective 360 presents a very special one-on-one conversation with Jane Elliott. Join the conversation, listen, and learn. Be inspired and live your purpose. Host Nancy Lamons and special guest Jane Elliott will bring questions and answers that all sides of the table need to hear. Don't miss this conversation. Perspective 360, the show that sparks ideas and advances equity and inclusion. Find your voice. Tell your story. Let's talk. Perspective 360, July 15th, Nancy Lamons and Jane Elliott.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. How about that?
How about it?
All right.
Go ahead.
Well, welcome to Perspective 360. And what I want to do in these conversations is to really create a forum around courageous and candid conversations. And clearly, you have been leading that charge for a long time. And I guess I'll start off with Jane. April 4th, 1968, a day after that date, actually, something pretty miraculously happened for you in your life. Can you take us back to that time and what was occurring and what happened in your school?
Actually, it wasn't miraculous. It was hell on wheels, because I went into my classroom that morning. I'm serious about that. I went into my classroom that morning determined to educate my third graders, my 9-year-old all-white Christian children living in an all-white Christian community, about Martin Luther King Jr., why he was in the street, what he was protesting, and why anybody would want him dead. And I couldn't understand why anyone would want him dead. The first student in my classroom was Stephen Armstrong. He came in and said, "Hey, Elliott, they shot that king last night. Why'd they shoot that king?" I said, "We're going to talk about that, Stephen. This is really hard for me to describe, because every time I talk about this, I get the feeling that I got the day Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. He represented hope for me. And for me, hope is an acronym for holding on to positive energy. And that's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. And I went home and found out the night at 4 o'clock when I left the school, and went home, and my sister called and said, turn on the television. And I did. And there it said Martin Luther King Jr. was dead. The world has stopped turning for a minute, because I so admired that man. He wasn't perfect, but he was so determined to make a change that was better for all of us. He wasn't all about making things better for Black people. He was about making things better for all of us. And I couldn't stand that. So that after I did some thinking and watching some television and watching some Elliott commentators ask questions of members of the Black community, like when our leader was killed, his widow held us together. Who's going to keep your people in line? That's what one of them asked 3 leaders of the Black community. So I changed the channel. And there's another one saying, don't you Black Negroes think you should feel sympathy for us white people during this experience, because we can't feel the anger at this killing that you Negroes can. And I thought, oh my God, if these 2 adult, erudite, sophisticated, educated white males don't understand, aren't sensitive enough to the Black situation to ask those questions of those men on that day, we have to make a change. I have to teach my third graders in such a way that they will never be that insensitive. So at that point, I decided that I was going to split my class according to the color of their eyes the next day. And I didn't make this up on my own. I learned this from Adolf Hitler. One of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber during what has come to be called the Holocaust was eye color. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. I decided that the next day, my students were going to find out how it feels to be judged unfairly on the basis of a physical characteristic over which you have absolutely no control. So I went into my classroom the next morning. Stephen Armstrong asked the most inflammatory question of the day, and then I put them through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And within 3 minutes after I started the exercise, I learned an immense amount. I told my students the blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. And I put blue-eyed people on the bottom that first day because I'm blue-eyed. Most of the students in the room were. Blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people. They're as clean as brown-eyed people. They're as civilized as brown-eyed people. I said to them all the things we say to children about people of color in this country on a daily basis, and we're still saying it. Don't think for a moment that we aren't. That's why we have a fool in the White House, because enough people are willing to go along and say that kind of thing. And that's why we have a totally racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric fool pretending to be our leader. Immediately, little brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, oh my God, there it is. This 9-year-old child now has the power to challenge her teacher because of a physical characteristic over which we have no control. Her brown eyes have given her that power, and she's willing to grab it and accept it and go with it in less than 3 minutes. At that point, Alan Moss in the back row stood up and said, if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal of the superintendent. They're both brown-eyed. And I thought, and there's the other side. He is damning me with faint praise. He's appreciating me, and he's defending me, not as his teacher, but as a member of his eye color group, a member of his race. Oh my Lord, this is how it works. I was absolutely astounded at the things I learned that day. I had taken the child psychology courses. I thought I knew what I was doing. I knew nothing about racism. I would have sworn until that day that I wasn't a racist. I was wrong. I watched my blue-eyed children become withdrawn and frightened and passive and terrified. And I watched my brown-eyed children become aggressive and belligerent and overbearing and powerful and just so arrogant that I could scarcely stand the sight of them. Ugly things happened. I watched 4 little brown-eyed boys who were dyslexic and who couldn't spell or read at the beginning of the year. On the day they were on the top of that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell. I couldn't believe what was happening. On the other hand, I had in my classroom that year, Carol, the Lutheran minister's daughter. She had come into my classroom in February, reading at the 6th grade level. 6th grade level for a 3rd grader is pretty bright. Wow. She was very, very bright. She had never multiplied. I taught her how to multiply the first 15 minutes of math class. She never made a mistake in multiplication again until the day she had the wrong color eyes. And on that day, she made mistakes in reading and spelling and forgot how to multiply. Now, the only thing that had changed for that child was she had the wrong color eyes. Now, imagine if I can do that with brown-eyed boys who are dyslexic, all of a sudden they can read, and with a blue-eyed girl who can't read after 20 minutes of being in that situation. What happens to children of color when we use that exercise with them based on skin color all their lives? And that's what we do. I was just absolutely astounded, thunderstruck, and angry and scared. And I went down to the teacher's lounge at noon to share with the other 2 3rd grade teachers what was going on. I wanted some support. I wanted somebody to tell me that I was imagining this, that it wasn't really happening. Walked into the teacher's lounge. There were a number of teachers in the lounge, including the other 2 3rd grade teachers, one of whom was about 52 and the other was over 60. And I told them what was happening in my classroom. When I finished speaking, the younger of those 2 said, I don't know how you have time to do all that extra stuff. It's all I can do to teach reading, writing, arithmetic. Well, I had listened to her teach kids how to spell, and I knew that she didn't know how to do that. The other one, over 60 years old, well, I'm serious, it was interesting. The other one, over 60 years old, had been molding young minds for over 30 years in that town, said to me, on the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, for God's sake, I don't know why you're doing that. I thought it was about time somebody shot that son of a bitch. Wow. No teacher frowned. No teacher gasped. No teacher said, Helen, do you realize what you've done? No teacher said, you could lose your job for that. No teacher said, God is love. These are all good Christian women. Church twice on Sunday and once in the middle of the week. None of them said, insomuch as ye have done it unto one of these, my brethren, so have ye done it unto me. No, judge not that ye be not judged. None of them said any of those things. Every one of them either smiled or laughed and nodded because she had expressed their feeling perfectly. And as the most senior member of the group, she had the most right to do so. I went back to my classroom right then, and I decided in that moment that no child or no person of any age will ever leave my presence with those attitudes unchallenged. I may not be able to change your attitude, but I can challenge your attitude. And you have to prove to me that white people are superior to everybody else on earth. And you can't because it isn't true. In the first place, there's no such thing as a white person. You're looking at the color of me. Do you see my shirt? There are no white people on the face of the earth, except in Tanzania. There is a large group of people who suffer from albinism. They're albinos, so their bodies don't produce much melanin. However, their other parts, they have other parts of their bodies, and internally they have color in their bodies. So get over it. This is something that every child should. This should be in every person's home. This is a set of people of all different colored people, and there's a number under each one of them. These colors are on the Pantone color wheel. If you want to find your color, you go to the color wheel, you put your hand against the color wheel, and you'll find out what color your skin is. There's a number for every one of us. Now, if you don't know where that is, you get the National Geographic magazine. Would you say these two children?
Yes.
They're twins. Would you say they're biracial? Or would you say they're humans?
They're humans, first and foremost. Humans, absolutely. That's all.
Right. And that's right. And that's the only race there is.
Yeah.
So they can't be biracial. So we've got to get over the idea of biracial. There's no such thing unless one of their parents came from outer space. And in this magazine, there's an article and it shows these two parents, and they're obviously, neither one of them is from outer space. So here's what I learned first that day. Number one, you can't teach what you don't know. And those other two teachers didn't know that there's just one race. And they didn't know that thinking that man should be killed because he was a member of a so-called different race, that we had the right to kill him. They didn't know that. They thought we did. And they didn't know that what they said was illegal then. And it's sure as the devil illegal now, but people are still saying that kind of thing. I went back to my classroom. We finished the day with the blue-eyed people on the bottom, the brown-eyed people on the top. It was difficult. I pulled down this map on the wall that day, and the ring slipped off my thumb. The map went around and around and around the roll, the way it does in the little Excedrin commercial. And I said, well, I've done it again. And brown-eyed Debbie sitting in the front row once again said, well, what do you expect? You've got blue eyes, haven't you? And as God is my judge, I have never felt like about a child like I felt about that child before, and only one since. I can still see the picture I had in my mind's eye. I could see myself backhanding that little brown-eyed witch against the wall. I wanted her to fly through the air, hit that wall, and slide down like a broken egg. And I wanted to be at the bottom when she got there. That was all going through my mind. And I thought, my God, Jane, look what you want to do to this kid. And then once again, Alan Moss jumped to my defense. And he said, oh, Debbie, her eyes ain't got nothing to do with it. You know, she never has been able to do that right. Once again, he didn't praise me greatly. He just said, you know, she never has been able to do that right. But it isn't because of her eyes. She just can't pull down the map right. It was awful. When it was time for those kids to go home, they were glad to go home, and they didn't want to come back. Brown-eyed people had a good day. Blue-eyed people hadn't. I had never had my students want to be violent to one another before, but on that day, little brown-eyed Debbie stepped up, and Carol stepped up, brown-eyed Debbie and the two other kids, brown-eyed kids, stepped up behind Carol, the brilliant one, reached up, one of her hit her across the back with her forearm, and when Carol turned around, Debbie said to her, now you have to apologize to me for getting in my way because I'm better than you are.
Wow.
These are 9-year-olds. These are 9-year-olds, all the same color, all from the same community, many of them related. And yet you put the ugliness of the lie of difference based on physical characteristics over which we have no control into play, and you create a small piece of the United States of America in a classroom. And that's what I did that day. I went to my mother's house to tell her what had happened. I needed some support. And she said to me, Jane, you better be careful. You don't want to end up where Aunt Eunice did. I said, where'd Aunt Eunice end up? In a mental institution. Because you see, what I was describing sounded insane. Because it is insane to treat people positively or negatively on the basis of a physical characteristic over which they have no control.
Absolutely.
She thought I was crazy, and she was quite certain that I'd end up in trouble. Well, I did. Believe me. It was very interesting. Then on Monday we reversed the exercise. The same things happened on Monday as had happened on Friday, but with one strange and wonderful, and I hope prophetic difference. The blue-eyed kids were much less vicious to the brown-eyed kids than the brown-eyed kids had been to them. And on Tuesday, before we discussed the exercise at all, I had each child write a 4-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. was, how the child felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. when they had finished writing, we got in a magic circle where you can say anything you want to. And I said, okay, kids, now I want to know, you blue-eyed boys said you were going to get even with the brown-eyed people when you got your chance. You said that on Friday. On Monday, you didn't get even. Why didn't you get even? And they almost in a chorus said, because we found out how it feels to be treated that way, and we didn't want to make anybody feel the way we felt the day we were on the bottom. I thought, oh, thank you, God. Thank you, God. They learned something. They learned something that I have a feeling that that is something that people of other color groups have learned. That you know how it feels to be discriminated against. You know how it feels to be spat upon. You know how it feels to be treated unfairly. Since you know how that feels, I think white people who are afraid that every person of color wants to get even with all of us are wrong. I think every person of color wants to get even with one or two of us. I don't think they want to get even with all. Do you know one or two?
I do.
And don't name them. I don't need to know who they are. But you see, I was on stage with that lovely woman. Anyway, Angela Davis.
Oh, yes.
She and I were at the University of Texas a couple years ago, and she came in and did her thing and used words this long, and the students were all really, really impressed. And I thought, ooh, you're not going to like me. And then they introduced me, and I said, okay, here's the problem. And then just about that time, some white woman in the third row said, aren't those people going to get even with us when they get power? Because we had said a few things about that. I said, wait, let's find out whether that's true. Well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself Black, a member of the Black race, who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. And there were about 1,500 students and teachers in that room, and half of them were Black. 3 young Black males stood. The rest of them all just turned and looked at him like, are you nuts? I said, okay, to this white woman. I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us. Relax. She said, okay. I said, however, let's be honest about this. Well, every person who considers himself or herself a member of the Black race who wants to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand. They all leaped up. Every one of them leaped to their feet and cheering and laughing and high-fiving one another. And I said, there it is. There it is. Now the white one's getting really grumpy. I said, well, don't worry about this. You see, all you have to do if you want to be treated fairly in the future is treat people fairly in the present. Be sure that you behave in a way that you aren't one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. Does that make sense to you? And she went, and the Blacks were, yeah. I said, you see, we can solve this problem if we change our behaviors. I didn't learn that and watching the kids and what they did, but I learned watching what I, as a white person, look like by going through that exercise, taking my students through that exercise, and allowing them to use it against me. Because when Debbie said, how come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes? It's like that person that you walk into to get a job and you're Black, and you talk to the person over the telephone, and the person looks up and says, I didn't know you were Black. You don't sound Black.
Yes.
Have you had that experience? Yes, absolutely.
I've heard that a few times.
I bet you have. I'll bet you have. You don't sound, or this one, you talk real good for a Black person. Oh my God. And we can't even use proper grammar. We don't say you
Jane,
talk real well.
you're quite articulate.
For a Black person. Oh, you're quite
articulate.
How did you become so articulate? And and you just want and I don't know how you resist it, but I want to reach out and strangle the person who says that and say, can you hear me now? Listen very carefully. Can you hear me now? You see, I have a real dislike of those who talk about these things in 3 and 4 syllable words instead of saying, here's the way it is. Here's what happens. Here's why it happens. Here's what we can do about it. And what are we going to do?
Right.
And offer us no cure, no way to cure it except come to another class and we'll have another class on inclusion.
Yeah.
Well, I have trouble with things like those words that we are using now, conscious bias and unconscious bias.
Okay. Talk to us about that.
Well, I think if you are suffering from unconscious bias, someone who recognizes it needs it, and this happens all the time, but we don't allow it to happen. Someone needs to say, do you realize what you just said? The woman who comes up to me and says, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, when we're going to talk about color. I said, and I say to them very kindly, I knew you were colorblind before you said it, because if you weren't colorblind, you wouldn't wear that shirt with those pants. Or if that doesn't work, I say, if you weren't colorblind, you wouldn't have your hair that color. And they get upset and they storm away. And I have offended them. But I'm not supposed to be offended by the fact that she has just said that she has to deny the largest organ on my black cousins' bodies, which is their skin. Inch to inch, it is the largest organ on our body. That she can deny that and say that she doesn't see it, she's colorblind. Absolutely. No. When somebody says that, you say to them, what color is your car? And if they know what color their car is, then they can no longer claim to be colorblind.
Wow.
Or look at their fingernails and say, look at your fingernails. Your fingernails are a different color than your hands, aren't they? Well, yes, I did that. Well, nobody did this to me. This is the way I was born. And I was born ignorant, and so were you, but I'm getting over it. How about you? I mean, you see, you aren't allowed to say that kind of thing, but I say it regularly, which is the reason I have been experiencing social distancing for 52 years. Because, oh yes, because you can't do what I do and expect so-called white people to spend any time around you, because they are invariably, because it's part of their makeup that when they're around me, they have to say something racist, because in their heads.
Yep, I was going to ask you that, Jane, is that when you are in the room and you've been, again, you've been a proponent of this for a long while. Do you feel, I mean, like, are they going to hear this message more from you than they would hear it from somebody like me?
Of course they are. Of course they are, because it's permissible for me to say it. But if they talk about it, they're talking like a victim. If I talk about it, I'm talking like an ally. That is barn dirt. That is absolute barn dirt. It is up to me to change the situation. If it isn't, every human being on the face of the earth is my 30th to 50th cousin, because we all have the same ancestor back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago, and those ancestors were black. So you and I are 30th to 50th cousins, whether you like it or not. That's the way it is.
Five.
You've got me for a cousin. High five. Let me see. I do have five. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes I wonder. We have to be prepared to say to people who make those ignorant remarks, wait a minute, do you realize what you just said? I don't go along with unconscious bias, because I think those folks know what they're saying. And if they think it isn't racist, if you aren't sure what you're saying is racist, shut up. I'm going to buy a sweater I saw advertised, a sweatshirt that I saw advertised someplace last week that said there's always time to shut up. And when you're going to, and if what you're going to say is going to be perceived as racist, don't say it, because it doesn't matter what you meant by what you said. What matters is how it is perceived. And if when somebody, and I'll never forget this one, woman walked up to me and said, I don't dislike blacks. I thought, oh, aren't they lucky? But she went on. She said, when I see one, I just think, there, but for the grace of God go I. And that was too much for me. And I exploded on her. I said, do you really think that God woke up one morning and wanted to make something beautiful and God made you? She said, that's not what I mean. I said, it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is how it is perceived. And I perceive that as a blatantly racist statement. Now, my dear, you aren't stupid. You can't fix stupid. What you are is ignorant. And we can fix that. And I'm going to fix that for you right now. Don't ever, ever say that to anyone again as long as you live. Because make no mistake about this, if we all traced our DNA back as far as it would go, every person on the earth would find a percentage of their DNA from a country in Africa. That's a fact. That's where we all came from, every one of us. And the only reason that white fool calls herself white is because her ancestors, those ancestors, moved farther and farther and farther from the equator, so they're exposed to less and less sunlight, so their bodies, their hair, their eyes, and their skin got lighter and lighter and lighter. Now, their brains didn't get bigger as their skin got lighter. Neither did they get smaller. They simply, their skin color, eye color, and hair color changed in response to the sunlight. That's all it is. That's what color is. And that's why when somebody says, and you're white, and I say, well, no, but if you want to call me white, that's up to you. However, I'm not. Well, you look white. No, let's fix that. What you're saying is you see white.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look white. You see white. You want to make me what you want me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want me to be, in order for you to respond positively to me and to have to be able to visit with me at all, is for you to see me the way you want me to be, which is white. I'm not
Jane,
white.
Jane, let me ask a question. Let me go back to something you just said, which is pretty powerful. I want you to speak on is, I was talking to a colleague the other day, and we were talking about privilege, white privilege, an unearned benefit. So let me ask you
Don't
this,
get me
Jane.
started.
Let me ask you, Jane, do you really think that someone is going to give up that privilege and power? I mean, if you've had it for so long, why would you willingly, quote, willingly give that up? Because what he was saying is that, when he's in a room of others like himself, and if somebody said something derogatory, guess what? I may be kicked out of the club if I stand up for what I know is not right. Can you talk about privilege and power?
He does. If you really think that having less melanin in your skin makes you a better person, or a more capable person, or a more valuable person, or a more moral person, you're wrong. It just makes you less brown. So we've got to stop calling that paper white privilege and calling it human ignorance, because that paper is all about ignorance.
Is it fair
Now,
to say
white privilege, as
yeah.
if you say to a white person, you have privilege because of the color of your skin, you have privilege because you're white, you have white privilege, most of them are going to say, well, I didn't ask for this privilege.
Yes.
It's not my fault. Have you gotten that one? Oh, absolutely. Well,
and
it's
I'm
not my fault.
I'm not a slave owner today. I'm not a slave owner today.
Don't tell me that we did away with slavery until you have read the book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. We have reinstituted slavery in the United States of America in our prison industrial system. And if you think we haven't, my dear lady, you do not allow somebody to say, I don't have anything to do with slavery, because they do. When Bill Clinton started the 3 strikes you're out legislation, they started 3 strikes you're out, thousands of young black males ended up in prison. And they are still there. And they work 8 hours a day for 20 cents an hour, and the money that they earn in that 20 cents an hour goes to the victim of their crime, and many of those are victimless crimes. So that money goes somewhere. Somebody's making money off slavery in this country every single day. And the nicest thing that can happen to a small community is to have a prison come to town, because that will employ 300 people. Slavery is as alive today in a different form as it was at the beginning, when we first imported our first black people from Hull, England. Now, I've been to Hull, England. I've been where they brought them in, and I've been with those people who say it should never have happened. We'd never let it happen again. I'm thinking, well, come on, wake up, people. We're still doing it. We are still doing it. And anyway, white privilege is a misnomer. We need to call it what it is: human ignorance.
Is it fair to say, though, that there are some advantages, though, because of color, not because of racism, of course, right? Because we're all one race, but because of color that exists today, and
Well, of course.
Okay.
Of course there is. Of course, that's what it's all about. It's all about the ignorance about skin color.
And so, how do we, because and again, another conversation with another colleague of mine said that, you know what, the media is really hyping this up worse than what it is. I really don't believe that racism is as bad as it is in the United States. And Jane, why can't we just go back to the way it was before these riots, before these protests? What do you have to say to that?
In other words, then you have to listen to what Frederick Douglass said. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Where justice is denied, that's in this country. Where poverty is enforced, that's in this country. Where ignorance prevails, that's in this country. And where any one class is made to feel that a society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. He also said, power concedes nothing. It never has, and it never will. Find out what any people will put up with, and you will have found out what will be inflicted upon them until it is resisted with either words or blows or with both.
Mm.
Now, anybody
Powerful.
who wants to go back to the way it was, see, that's like Ronald Reagan standing there and saying, we created this shining city on a hill. And I thought, oh my God, we created it out of the bones of Native Americans and Black people.
Absolutely.
He said, we're going to go back to the 50s. And immediately I thought, well, the 50s were great for white males. They weren't worth a damn for the rest of us. People like Mr. What's his face, Dinosaurus T-Rump, want us to go back to the 50s, make America great again. What he means is make America hate again. Put us back where we were in the 50s. He wants people to stay in their place. It was comfortable for him because he didn't realize until he read Ben Wattenberg's book and made a big mistake because he believed it. He didn't realize that within 30 years, white people will be a minority in the numerical minority in this country. Within 30 years, white people will be the minority in this country. They already are all over the world. Only 25% of the people on the face of the earth can be classified as white. The other 75% cannot be classified as white because they realize that they aren't. They're all shades of brown, and so are all white people. But now, white males, particularly in this country, are extremely concerned because they know that within 30 years, the people who are running this show are going to be people of other color groups. That's the way it is. And they don't want that to happen. And they're trying to keep it from happening. This fool, our present so-called leader, is trying to keep it from happening by one, limiting the number of immigrants that are allowed to come into this country. And Ben Wattenberg, in his book, The Birth Dearth, and don't read that book unless you read the one that he wrote in 1987. If you can get the copy of the 1987 Ben Wattenberg book, The Birth Dearth, get it if you can. I don't care what you have to pay for it. I'll pay you what you pay for it because I want that book in I had 3 copies and somebody walked away. Somebody borrowed all 3 of them. The first paragraph in that book says, the number one problem confronting the United States today is there aren't enough white babies being born in this country. If this is what Ben Wattenberg said, and he was an advisor to President of the United States and a member of the American Enterprise Institute. When he died 3 years ago, I didn't cry. He says there are 3 things we could do to solve this problem. Number 1, we could pay women to have babies as they have been doing in Western European countries for years. Then he says, and these are his words, not mine. Unfortunately, we would have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. He said, number 2, we could increase the number of legal immigrants that are allowed into this country every year. And again, unfortunately, the vast majority of those wanting to come to this country today are people of color, so we don't want to do that. He says, the third thing we can do is remember that 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Now, you need to think about what our present leader has done. He has decided to put up a wall on the southern border of the country because he has said openly, we don't want those brown-skinned people in here because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. Ben Wattenberg, to the life, he says, we are going to close these Planned Parenthood clinics because the evangelicals have told me that that's what God wants me to do. This has nothing to do with what God wants him to do. This has to do with the fact that 60% of the fetuses in 1987 that were aborted were white fetuses. Now, I told that at a college a couple of years ago. There were 2 young sprouts sitting down there with the red caps on that say, make America hate again. It says great again, but it means hate again. They said, Miss Elliott, you got your statistics wrong. I said, we'll visit about that after I get done with what I'm doing. I'll join you downstairs. So I went downstairs and I said, now to these 2 young men, what's your problem? He said, you've got your statistics wrong. I said, which statistics were those? He said, you said that 60% of the fetuses that were aborted were white. I said, they were in 1987. Well, he said, last year, it was only 39% of the fetuses that were aborted were white. I said, you just made my point. He said, what do you mean? I said, it was 60% in 1987, but now because we've closed the Planned Parenthood clinics and because the evangelicals And if you don't know about the evangelicals, you need to read Frank Schaeffer's books about them, and it will really blow you away. I said, we've made progress. We're trying to slow down the number of white fetuses that are aborted, and it's working. Only 39% now, and 60% in 1987. He just looked like I'd hit him in the wrong place. He said, I didn't think of it that way. I said, think of it that way. Think about what you just learned here. And his little brother, who was also in college, was sitting there and said, she's right, she's right. And he's looking like his world is collapsing around him because, Benjamin Disraeli said there are three kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics. And what he was feeding me were statistics, which is way beyond damn lies. He walked away, and the professor came over and told him and said, I need to visit with you. So she took him out in the hall, and they were still visiting when I left to go home because he needed somebody to repair his shattered ego.
Right.
Now what am I going to do?
Can you explain to our viewers what that is? Because you said he lost, right? His ego was shaken. Can you talk about white fragility?
Well, see, I've read Beverly D'Angelo's White Fragility.
Yes.
And she makes some
I think
good points.
It's a sellout book.
Oh, sure, it's a sellout book because she tells us why whites can't talk about racism. Mm-hmm. Whites can't talk about racism because they don't want to hear somebody say, you don't exist, Whitey. Nobody wants to hear that they don't exist. White people do not exist. It's time to get over the word white when you describe human beings, because that's not what we are. We are using the vocabulary from the 15th and 16th centuries to solve problems in the 21st century. It doesn't work. It's perfectly obvious to anybody who's read anything at all in the last 20 years about racism. I'm absolutely serious about this. We have a nation right now in which most of us are screen addicted. We're addicted to what's on the screen.
Yes.
And you go to a school and there's every kid in front of a computer with a computer in front of them. So this is all they learn, is what they see on that screen. Now, if nobody ever says to you on that screen, people don't come in black and white, my dear. They come in many colors, but they do not come in black and white. We need to teach you that. We need to show you the National Geographic magazine. You need to realize that we have lied to you for 50 years. This came up during the Spanish Inquisition. This whole disgusting business started during the Spanish Inquisition. I was on the Red Table program couple of years ago. And when we were done, I said to those 4 women, 3 were black and the other was white. They brought her downstairs so they can get the white point of view. And she gave them the white point of view. And I stood there and thought, oh my God, that is the white point of view. Anyway, I said to them, how long do you think this has been going on? And they all said, well, forever. I said, no, it hasn't been going on forever. This is relatively recent. It was during the Spanish Inquisition that Torquemada and people were trying to turn everybody Catholic. So they killed a whole bunch of people, and they realized that they'd killed a whole bunch of Christians. All of a sudden, they realized you can't tell what a person's religion is by how they look. So they had to find another way to identify those that might not be Christian. So they set upon skin color. They killed thousands of people because they had the wrong color skin. Before that, it was because they were the wrong religion. But after they set upon skin color, they're quite certain that those Native Americans couldn't possibly be Christians. So the whole thing is relatively recent, and we need to put a stop to it. We weren't there. Nobody is born a bigot. Racism is not genetic. Racism is a learned response. If you graduate from high school in the United States of America and you aren't a racist, you haven't been listening. Because according to your social studies teachers, all the inventions, the creations, the adventures, the wonderful things were done in this country since the beginning by white males.
Jane, how do we change this though in the educational system when it's been whitewashed? And I agree with you completely. How do we change this? We have
to re-educate the teachers. We have to educate the educators. People call me a teacher, and I say, don't call me a teacher. I'm not a teacher. I'm an educator.
Do you say that?
The word, oh yeah, because the teachers dispense facts and figures to kids to get them ready for the end of term testing.
Mm.
An educator, the word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. You can't do that by having all the pictures even in the math books. The people who are in control, the people who have the power in the illustrations in the math books are white males.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that by teaching children that Black history began with slavery.
Right.
Black history began 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And if the educators haven't read the Anthony Browder's, is that his name? Browder's, Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, they
Mm-hmm.
are not fit to teach in the public, private, or parochial schools in this country, because they will only be teaching what they know, and what all they know is what they learned in schools just like the one they're teaching in. In which you don't teach the history, you teach the Columbus discovered America.
Right.
Columbus didn't
It's not
discover
accurate.
America. You can't discover a place where people are already living.
Correct.
They discovered it before you got there. And
Yes.
those people who were here when Columbus got here came from Africa. They did not spring up out of the ground. I know that's a good folk tale that the natives say, but that isn't the way it happened. And if they would have their DNA traced, they would find out that their DNA, if they trace it back far enough, also came from a country in Africa. We teach, just a minute, I want to show you something.
Yes, ma'am. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, well, you're going to see it. You see this map?
Yes.
Have you ever seen this map before?
Yes.
Yeah, isn't this the map that you saw grades K through 12?
I did. Yes.
You see
Very
Greenland.
familiar.
You see Greenland hanging down here like a great big ripe plum.
Mm-hmm. I
At
remember
the
being
bottom
there.
in the legend. Oh, yeah, absolutely. In the bottom on the legend at most of the Mercator maps, down here in the bottom, there's a legend, and in the legend, you read the legend. Teachers never read the legend; they just show them the map because we're doing map studies. We're not doing fact study. We're doing map study. So we're going to do this map, which is not a fact. According to the legend at the bottom of this map, which isn't on this one, it says South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland.
Doesn't look like
That's
that.
what it says in the legend. No, of course it doesn't. You see, we put that on the legend at the bottom, but here's the rest of it. So if you teach the kids the legend, then you can't use this map. According to your social studies teachers, what is the equator? Hemi means half. Well,
Yes.
on this map, the equator is clear down here. Clear down
Interesting.
here. Two-thirds of the way across the map. So that you can't say this is a hemisphere because it's 2/3 instead of 1/3, instead of half. So you can't say hemisphere and use this, and you can't say this is an accurate depiction of the size, the shape, and the location of the land masses on the earth, because according to the legend at the bottom, South America is 9 times larger than Greenland, and Mexico, little Mexico here, is bigger than Alaska. Except on this map, Alaska is bigger than Mexico.
Absolutely.
This is what you call teaching racism on a daily basis. Now, some teachers are going to say, you can't put a spherical surface on a spherical shape on a flat surface without that kind of distortion. Well, actually, a man named Arlo Peters proved that you can. See this map?
Yes.
This is the Peters projection map. On this map, South America is 9 times larger than Greenland.
Wow. What is the name of that map again?
That's the Peters projection map.
Okay.
Everybody needs to get a copy of this. In fact, the Boston Public Schools have put this in their classrooms since they watched me on the Oprah Winfrey show show those 2 maps. Yes, and just last year they put this map into their classrooms. Is this a perfect map? Absolutely not. These shapes are distorted, but their sizes and locations are right. So, and the equator is at 0 degrees, halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole.
Amazing.
Which is the way it ought to be. If you're going, this is what I mean by we have to re-educate the educators. There's something else that you might find interesting. This is Africa.
Okay.
This is the continent of Africa. We could put all of these countries into the continent of Africa. China, Europe, Europe, the continent, India, the USA, and Argentina would all fit in the continent Africa. Did you know
Wow.
that?
What a visual.
You
That's a
think that's
phenomenal visual.
important? Yeah.
Yes.
What a phenomenal visual. And right there is where all the natural resources that we're going to need for the next 1,000 years are. And yet we call, and those folks, and from here, this is the area from whence we all came. All of us came from this. We need to know that, and we need to teach that in the schools, and we need our kids to know that every one of you had an ancestor in one of these countries in Africa.
Absolutely. Jane, let me ask you a question.
What was
I know
the
our time is winding down, but just briefly, BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement. Can you speak to that? Because now I've seen in protests, we've all seen on television, that it seems to be folks with more color, right? It's a variety of color. What do you think about the BLM movement? And I hear so many of people saying, I'm tired of the protesting. I don't believe in Black Lives Matter.
I know white people, and I know that when white people hear Black Lives Matter, they hear only Black Lives Matter. That's the problem. The problem is that you're depending on white people being as smart as Black people are. And you can't depend on that because we haven't been forced to be smart. All we have been encouraged to do is be what we are. And it's enough that I'm white. I don't have to be good. All I have to do is be white because that makes me right because I'm white. You need to realize that if you're going to keep white people from weaponizing Black Lives Matter, you have to put Black Lives Matter, comma, 2. It's that simple. When you put when you put 2 at the end of that, it means all the rest of you matter, but Black Lives Matter 2. And you could de-weaponize that for white folks. And then what would they do? They'd find something else to complain about, but it would be hard to argue with the statement that Black Lives Matter 2. Because
Very
white
powerful.
people hearing that hear only. They hear only Black Lives Matter. And they say, well, what about the rest of us? Don't we matter? And then somebody has to say, look, fool, they just forgot to put the word 2 on the end of it. And you are hearing something that isn't there. That's what we white folks do on a daily basis. We are reinforced for not hearing ways the way they're meant. We hear them the way they're said. We don't hear them the way they're meant. When people say Black Lives Matter, they mean we all matter. And honestly, since we're all descendants of those first Black human beings, when you say Black Lives Matter, it means all lives matter. You better have them fix that so that it makes Black people who are Black matter equally with those who are other than Black, who do not realize that they're Black. You know, we don't want to admit that there's any Black in my background. I'm really proud of the fact that there's Black in my background because I think it might be part of what makes me absolutely determined not to listen to the nonsense. And I think that's what, you see, that's the reason my heroes are Black women, because they manage to keep on keeping on no matter what we do to them. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have developed.
It's hard, Jane.
Hey, I know it must be. It's got to be. Oh my God, I'll never forget the Black woman who stood beside me, tall white man on my left, a tall Black woman on my right, because the woman, and this was a group of department heads and administrators at a university, and this one liberal white woman, of course, it's always a liberal white woman who opens her mouth, said, I don't think, why are we talking about differences? We are more similar than we are different. I think we should talk about similarities. And I said, I'll show you why we have to talk about differences. So I pointed at a tall white male in the audience. I said, will you come up here and stand beside me? Well, of course he would, you know, he's a tall white male. And I said, there was a taller Black female on the other. I said, so they came up and stood here beside me. And I said, no. And I wanted to see whether those brilliant, educated folks would pass the test. And I said to that group, do you folks see any difference here? Yeah. I said, what's the first difference that you noticed? Now, make no mistake about this. The white male was probably 6'1", and the Black female was probably 6'2.5" or 6'3". And I'm 5'1" on a good day. They said, immediately somebody said, height. And I thought, you just flunked the test.
Yeah.
That is not the first thing that they saw. It wasn't the first thing that I saw when I picked out the people who were going to stand beside me. And it wasn't the first thing that they saw either. So I said to this tall male, is your height important to you? Yeah. Did you earn it? No. Does it give you power? Yeah. Do you fear anything? No. You're tall enough to you can do anything. Yeah. I said to this black woman, is your height important to you? And she said, yes, but there are some other issues to deal with. I said, we're going to get to them. So we did. Yes, her height doesn't give her power. So I said, do you see any other differences? So they said, sex. I said, you mean gender? Well, yeah. I said to this tall white male, is the fact that you're male important to you? Yeah. Does it give you power? Yeah. Okay. So I said to the black female, same thing. Does your gender give you power? No. But she said, once again, there are some other issues we have to deal with. So then they hit on age. They refused to say what they saw. Finally, somebody, after we went through all those, finally, and this man has power in all three, and this woman has power in none. Right. Finally, someone in that audience, a female incidentally, said, color. I said, thank you very much. You're the first time I've ever had somebody say color. Are you talking about skin color or hair color? She said, skin color. So I said to this male, is the color of your skin important to you? And he said, I never have to think of it. And I thought, you lucky SOB. This is not the time to say that. That is deep. I never have to think of it. I said, did you earn your color? No. Does your color give you power? Yes. And you know it? Yes. Is there anything you're afraid of? No. And I thought, you aren't afraid yet, you fool. I'm going to land on you. You're going to be sorry, but you can't say what you want to. So I turned to this black female and I said, does the color of your skin give you power? And she paused for a long moment. And finally she said, it was awful. She said, I'm going to say something now that I've never said out loud before. I said, and that's because, she said, because I'm ashamed of it. And I said, and that would be, she said, and by now there was one tear slowly making its way down the left side of that beautiful black woman's face. She said, I have 2 children. They're both girls. Both times when I was pregnant, I prayed that I wouldn't have a son. I said, and that's because, you know what her answer was?
I know why.
She said, because I didn't want to have to think about what he'd go through. And I didn't want to have to think about what I'd have to go through when I lost him. And she didn't say if I lost him. She said when I lost him. There wasn't a dry eye in that house, including my own. And I said to the group, this woman taught you in a few moments more than I could teach you in a lifetime, because she has been learning it for a lifetime. Now, those of you who are concerned about Colin Kaepernick, not treating the national anthem properly, think of the last words. Oh, say is that star-spangled banner yet wave, or the land of the free, and I pointed at this white male, and the home of the brave. This woman has to be brave to get out of bed in the morning, and this man is free because of your ignorance about skin color. And you are educators. Now, by the gods of war, get busy and start educating. Stop training, stop consulting, stop teaching, and start educating us our way out of this mess. How dare you allow this situation to be perpetuated? And by then there was some young woman came up and gave the woman a Kleenex, and she was handing them out as she came up, because everybody in the room was crying because, my God, what we just learned. I think they learned more in that moment than they had ever learned before about racism and about its effect on human beings. And we had the women's movement. And none of us white women admitted that the white males allowed the women's movement to succeed because it took away the emphasis from the civil rights movement. We allowed that to succeed because it almost killed the civil rights movement, because and most of the women who were engaged in the women's movement were white. If it hadn't been that way, the women's movement would not have succeeded. Make no mistake about that.
That's powerful.
So now, I think people have to think about these things. And I know the reason that I do and they don't, but is because people my age, I was born in 1933, the year Adolf Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt came to power. I went through from the years from birth to 1945, hearing my father just infuriated by what Hitler was doing. He never mentioned to us that one of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber was eye color. I found that out later, and I thought, oh my God, what a way to judge people on the basis of the color of their eyes. But they were going to found an Aryan nation, which was going to be composed of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale-skinned people.
Right.
Think about that. And we helped him to do that for years. In fact, when they said to President Roosevelt, what are you going to do about Adolf Hitler? He said, that man is taking care of a problem the rest of us don't want to deal with. Leave him alone.
Oh my. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you see, there's an advantage in getting old. But the disadvantage is that you watch people do really, really ignorant things and say really ignorant things. Now we're watching these protesters in the street all over the world who are protesting what happened to those two black males in this country in 2 weeks.
Right.
Horrible things happened to them.
Right.
Blacks knew before it happened that wasn't the first time it had happened. That was the first time you saw it on camera.
Yes.
That's the first time they saw it as it happened on camera, and wasn't a movie made for television.
No.
And all of a sudden, people of all colors realized black people haven't been lying all this time. White people have been lying all this time. We didn't know. We should have known. Now that we know, we absolutely have to do something about it. Yes. And now it's died down, and now we're back to talking about COVID-19 instead of talking about the fact that the Navajo Nation is being decimated by COVID-19 because they live out there. Where there's no running water, there's nothing but dirt floors, there's no electricity, and they're dying.
Absolutely.
But we don't care because they're only First Nations people. What do we care? You see, you can't. You can either be a moral person or an immoral person. You have to decide which you're going to be. And if you put in place someone like Dinosaurus T. Rump, that's an indication of a lack of morality.
But Jane, I've been hearing this lately, reverse discrimination. So we make 3 steps forward, and then we have the conversation of reverse discrimination. What about that?
There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. You can't discriminate without the power to do it. Blacks don't have that power yet. We don't have reverse discrimination. What we're experiencing in this country is delayed justice. It is delayed justice. And the next time somebody says to you, that's reverse discrimination, you need to say, no, you're wrong. I hate to tell you that you're wrong, but what you're talking about is delayed justice. Right. In order to be a racist, you have to have the power to institutionalize your racist feelings and behaviors. Blacks don't have that power. And that's the thing that scares white people. They're afraid blacks are going to get that power and use it the way we white people have used it while we've had it. I think that those young black males and females in Houston, at the University of Houston, proved that no, blacks don't want to get even with all of us. They want to get even with 1 or 2. I think Dinosaurus T. Rump is going to be one of them. And I think he's scared to death that he's going to have to leave the presidency, and he'll fight as hard as he can to avoid that so that he won't get sent into a prison where many of the inmates are black. And we'll look at him as, now it's our turn. That isn't what's going to happen. He doesn't have to worry about that. The members of the Business Roundtable will keep him out of there. And if you don't know about the Business Roundtable, the Business Roundtable, get Robert Rice's book, The System, Who Rigged It and How We Fixed It. Get that book and read it. And then you'll know about the Business Roundtable and how Mr. What's-His-Face thinks maybe he can stay in the presidency if he has enough power coming from the Business Roundtable to keep him there. And if we don't do something about it, he will, and they will. Reverse discrimination is like white privilege. It's a word that we made up, and it's like white fragility. It's a word that we made up, it's a phrase that we made up to help us to explain white ignorance.
So what can we do? How do we get out of this ignorance? I'm hoping these conversations are happening, but they can't just happen, within, the Black community or certain communities. They have to happen everywhere. How do we get out of this state of ignorance, Jane?
We educate ourselves. We have to self-educate.
Okay.
If you graduated from high school, you're a racist. So now you need to get educated. You go to any good website, but go to my website, janeelliott.com,
Yes.
Download the printed learning materials. The first is a set of typical statements the white folks make that think they aren't racist. Things like, when I see you, I don't see you black. You know, all those statements are there. Anyway, you read through those and you check those that you have heard or that you agree with. Then you turn to the next page, which is a set of clarifications of the statements, how they are perceived by the person who's on the receiving end of them. And then you'll know why you better not say those again. The third page is a set of commitments to combat racism. 18 things you can do in your own environment to deal with your own racism. And make no mistake about this. Racism is an individual problem. Now some white female is going to say, I think it's a societal problem. I think societies have to change this. And I say, no, societies are made up of individuals. Individuals can change. And as individuals change, so will the society. So do not say, we have to wait till the society decides to make these changes. No, each of us has to make these changes in his or her own life. And that way society will change. People go to the polls and vote for what's going to happen in society. November is coming. It's not far away. We can rid ourselves of a real severe problem if we vote properly in November. This is the thing that can turn this thing back. It's what turned it into this situation in the first place. Was the members of the electoral colleges in 4 states didn't know what the electoral college was put into the Constitution for. It was put in there by Thomas Jefferson to guarantee that nobody who was unfit for that job would ever get the job. The people who were in those 4 states, and I was one of them, voted wrongly in the electoral college. You see, one person can make a difference. Those 4 people made a difference in who became our president. Those 4 members, not 4 people, but all the members of the electoral college who voted wrong, put us in a really ugly situation, in a situation in which we are in danger of losing our democracy right now. We are in danger of becoming an autocracy, with the help of this man and the members of the Business Roundtable. And we have to see to it that doesn't happen. We're back in the days of the robber barons right now. This is like the days of the robber barons. And you ought to take a look at that. Everybody should take a look at what happened in the late 1800s and see what the robber barons did. And you will see the similarities to then and now. For the last 3.5 years, I have thought, my God, this is Hitlerian. This is like what Hitler did. And, you know, and then I'd say to myself, you're exaggerating this. That isn't what it's about, Jane. You've lived too long. You're getting old and senile. So then I read the book, When at Times the Mob is Swayed, by, I believe, Bert Newborn. When at Times the Mob is Swayed. And in the first or second chapter of that book, he says, Donald Trump's second wife wrote a book about her. And in the book, it said that Donald Trump had in his bedroom a bedside table in which there was a locked drawer in which he kept the writings of Adolf Hitler.
Really? Unbelievable.
Read the book, and then you'll see why I am upset and why I know now that I wasn't wrong when I thought this feels Hitlerian. Because the very things that Hitler did are the things that Donald Trump is doing. Divide and conquer. That's what he did. Pick out a group of people on the basis of a physical characteristic or a religion over which you have no control, and then use that to prove everybody else how vile they are and how un-American they are. And use the word American at every opportunity in total denial of the fact that everybody from the northernmost point of northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America, all the people in here are Americans. North Americans, Central Americans, Latin Americans, South Americans. These are all Americans. So, but you see, in our arrogance, we think of that America is only the 48 contiguous states, Alaska and Hawaii and the islands. No, America stretches from the North Pole to the South Pole in this hemisphere, in this area. So people need to stop talking only about America and start using the words USA.
Yes.
In the USA, we do this. We are the United States of America. We are not all of Americans of America.
Jane, in all of your history, is it worse now than it was then? And then the second question, because I know that your time, I want to be respectful of your time. Any regrets? Any regrets as you were going through this over the years with your family? You know, because often being a leader, and you were a leader in this work a long time ago, you have to stand alone. Is it worse today than it was then? And then any regrets, if at all?
When I first did this, people just thought I was a nut, and they and they stayed away from me in droves. I've been socially distancing for a long time, 52 years.
You meant
I've
that,
been
yeah.
socially distanced. Yes, yes, I have. And so I haven't got any of these communicable diseases that you did, because nobody's near me. which the only regret I have is that I didn't know what the people in Riceville were like. I thought they were all good Christians, 9 Christian churches in that town. So I thought they were all fine. And I thought my parents would understand. My mother didn't understand till the day she died. Because she said, Jane, in fact, she kicked me out of the family after my father died. She said, you've embarrassed all of us with that eye color thing. And we've lost our reputation in this community. Nobody wants to be related to you. And I said, well, okay, Mom, if that's what you want. She said, that's the way it is. So I didn't see any of my brothers or sisters from the time my father died, which is 1991, I believe, till the time my mother died, which is 2006. I think it was 2006, maybe 2008, because she had them obviously convinced that it was my fault that I wasn't coming over there. But she told me to stay away from here. Nobody's comfortable when you're around. And of course, they weren't comfortable when I was around. You can't say, I don't want her, you can have her, she's too fat for me, when I'm standing there thinking to myself, wait a minute. Wait just a minute. I know, look at some of my nieces. You really going to sing that? You know, that kind of thing. And you couldn't tell black jokes around me. But my father, I showed him the first film that was made in my classroom. The second year I did the exercise, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation sent a film crew down to film it. I called my dad and mother and told them I'd like to bring the film up to the hotel which we owned and they were living in. I said, I want you to see this film. So I went up, and my mother and father were there, and I showed them that film of those third graders going through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. When it was over, my father, who was 59 years old at the time, and I hadn't seen him cry since my little sister died at the age of 3 when I was 10, and she was the most beloved thing in his life. And he cried that day.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen him cry since. And he stood up after that film was done. I'd shut it off. And he stood up and he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his blue bib overalls. He was a farmer till the day he died. And he blew his nose and he wiped his eyes. And then he said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. And that was all I ever needed after that.
Absolutely.
After that, nobody could tell me that that was a bad thing to do.
Yes.
Because my father, at the age of 59, learned from watching that thing. He didn't have to go through it. He knew that he had made people go through it. He had been a party to that. He had cooperated with that. And then he saw what happened to little third graders when their peers cooperated with that. And he said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old. He would never listen to a black joke after that. He'd say, you really going to tell that? And if they went on, he said, well, I'm going in the other room. He wouldn't tell you to shut your mouth. He would just walk away. He just wouldn't support it. That's what he did. He learned an immense amount by watching those little third graders. And the film that was made in my classroom the next year, that Canadian film has never been shown in this country, but the one that was made the next year, The Eye of the Storm, is shown all over the world. And it isn't shown all over the world because of this brilliant white woman. No. It's shown all over the world because of what effect that exercise has for 2 days on little white children. And people who can't relate to what's happening to black children can watch that and think, by God, kids hadn't ought to be treated that way. Not for a day, not for an hour. And then you say, how about for a lifetime? Well, I don't think it's that bad. Try it. Try it on. You want to go through the exercise? No, I don't. Of course you don't. And when you say you don't, that means you know how ugly it is. I say to groups, every white person in this room who wants to spend the rest of his or her life being treated the way we treat our black citizens, please stand. Nobody stands. Nobody stands. So I say again, you didn't hear the directions. If you're white and you do unto others as you would have others do unto you,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to be treated the way we treat black people in this country, please stand. They look around like this. They don't move their heads. They just look from side to side to see if anybody's standing.
Right.
Nobody stands, because nobody wants to stand up and say, I want to take that shit.
Mm.
Because they know what's happening and they know it's ugly. And you can talk about subconscious bias and conscious bias until the cows come home. When you say that to a group of 1,500 people and nobody stands, then you have to
They're
say,
aware.
whoa.
It means they're aware.
They're
right?
aware. They know. And when I say to them, I don't believe in the golden rule.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in treating people the way I want to be treated. I know that there isn't a young man on the face of the earth who wants to be treated the way an 86-year-old woman wants to be treated.
Mm.
I don't have the right to treat people the way I want to be treated. I have to practice the platinum rule, which says, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. And in order for me to find out how somebody else wants to be treated, I have to ask them. And then I have to listen to their response. And if what they ask me to do is an indecent, illegal, or immoral, I have to do it, because it says so in the Bible. But we've twisted the Bible. You see, people who can turn Jesus white,
Mm-hmm.
when the Bible says he had feet of bronze and kinky woolly hair,
Does.
but
Mm-hmm.
if we can turn him, if we can turn him white in order to make him something that we can bow to or that we can depend on, we can obviously change the words of the golden rule, which came out of Chinese philosophy, and did not say, treat others the way you want to be treated. It said, do unto others as others would have you do unto them. In other words, treat others the way they want to be treated, because I know that not everybody wants to be treated the way I want to be treated. I know that there's not a doubt in my mind. But what my brothers don't want to be treated the way I want to be treated. And they never did. They never would accept that. So I had to accept what they were willing to do. I'm so social distancing. Here you come. That's okay too. That's okay too. It must have been hard to be related to me in those days. Now today it will be easier.
And you've had death threats, right? You've had death threats, I'm assuming, and your children probably it wasn't easy for them growing up.
Well, it was awful for them when they were in school, because they were in the school in which I was doing those things. So after the principal, the elementary principal's wife, who taught at the junior high level, came to me during a teacher's meeting one day and said, Jane, you got to get your kids out of this school. I said, why? These teachers are trying to destroy your children. Then we moved 17 miles away and put the kids in a new school, and I drove back and forth to school every day. They couldn't get rid of me. They were no longer allowed to weaponize my children. That's why I know that you have to put 2 on the end of Black Lives Matter, because we're weaponizing it. We white people are weaponizing it to hurt other people. So I got my kids out of there and I kept right on teaching there. So they didn't solve their problem, but they didn't have I was still there, but they didn't have my kids to get even with.
And they didn't have you stop doing the exercise?
Well, every year, some teacher would say, if she does that exercise, I'm going to talk to the principal. Every year, the principal would say, Mrs. Elliott knows what she's doing. They interviewed the superintendent. Oh, yeah. I had 3 different principals, 3 different superintendents while I was in that situation. And every year, the teachers would try to get me fired. A really lovely thing was said about me 2 weeks ago, and I think it was lovely. And they've got a poster out. Be a Jane instead of a Karen.
Oh, I love that.
Women don't have to be like that.
Yes.
If it's attitudes, they can learn not to express them, and not to constantly have those out. They can learn. We learned very quickly during the women's movement the things that you aren't allowed to say in front of women anymore, whether you want to or not. There are things you best not be saying. There are things we have learned not to say around blacks, to or about blacks, in the presence of somebody like me. Now, if being in total control means that I'm going to be called that name, I'll take that name and say thank you very much, because that means that you, sir, wouldn't have called me that if you weren't out of control. And you don't want to see me in control. However, get used to it, white males. Black people and women are going to run this show. And if you watch television today, many of the positions of power that were in the past occupied by white males are now being occupied by women, white women, and women of color. We need to realize that that is the face of the future. And we've got to stop talking about white fragility and start talking about white ignorance and start educating people of all kinds to the idea that there's only one race. We're all members of the same group. We are all shades of brown, period.
Yes.
Every human being on the face of the earth is a shade of brown. It's time to get over it.
Wow. Well, thank you. I have to tell you that.
When I go to a college now, I say, first, before we do anything else, we've got to get this thing settled right now. I'm going to settle all your problems, your racial problems right now. I can settle it with one question. Will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the human race please stand? They all stand. I say, thank you very much. There it is. You're all members of the same race. What in the hell are you fighting over?
Right.
You're all members of the same race. Now, since you're all members of the same race, you are all 30th to 50th cousins of one another. So turn to the person on your right, stick out your hand and say, hello, cousin. And they all do it, except one woman who wouldn't. I said, I'm waiting until you stick out your hand and say, hello, cousin, to that black woman beside you. And I'll wait until you do.
Oh, wow.
And she finally, and I said to the black woman, aren't you just thrilled? Oh, no. I said, neither am I, but she had to finally admit that you and she are cousins, whether she likes it or not. And most of them do it. They laugh like, well, isn't that something? Isn't that interesting that we aren't members of different races? And they admit it when you say, if you consider yourself a member of the human race, please stand. Then what are we fighting over?
Yes. Well, I tell you that ultimately, because again, my space has primarily been in corporate, right? And so I have these conversations, and when I hear people say they're still struggling with this, you have clearly helped over the years, and it's about education. And, I just thank you for everything that you've done. Just really appreciative of the work that you are doing and that you've done, and the sacrifices that you and your family have gone through for equity and for equality.
For common sense. And that's the problem. Common sense in uncommon amounts is what the world calls wisdom. Common sense in uncommon amounts is what the world calls wisdom. And that's why I see black women as wise, because they have common sense in uncommon amounts. They know this crap. They've lived with this crap. They understand that it's all damn foolishness. And you can use words like microaggression and macroaggression until hell freezes over. And you skate across the pond. It will not change the fact that we know. My dad said to us regularly, you know the difference between right and wrong, don't you? Yeah, well, do the right thing. Simple as that. Do the right thing and stop doing that and stop teaching that to your children. We know the difference between right and wrong. We better start doing the right thing, because 30 years from now, you are going to be on top. And people like white males, like Trump's sons, are going to be in a whole world of hurt. A world of hurt unless they change their behaviors and do it now. There's only one race on the face of the earth. Here's a final thought. Okay. A man named, and I never can remember his name, said, no power on earth can stop a man with a dream or an idea whose time has come. The idea of one race, the human race, is an idea whose time has come. And no power on earth is going to be able to stop it, because that one idea is going to kill the ignorance of racism. If we teach it long enough, that one idea could kill the major problem in the United States of America, which is the ignorance of racism. And if we will only teach that there's only one race, we're all members of it. Human beings come in different sizes and shapes and colors and genders and gender orientations and religions, but they are all members of the same race. So in my classroom, there are not going to be any racist remarks made. In my classroom, if you want to talk about religion, go ahead, because we choose our religion.
Mhm.
We do not choose the color of our skin.
Absolutely.
But thank you for giving me the time and the platform on which to say this, because if enough people hear this, eventually those people who say, well, my grandparents came here and they didn't get special treatment, somebody's going to say to them, did your grandparents come here enslaved?
Mm. Yes.
Would you think that would make a difference? Did your grandparents want to come here, or were they dragged here in chains? You want to talk about that? And then they'll shut up. Sometimes it's a good idea to wear that sweatshirt that says, there's always time to shut up.
Well, there you have
Okay.
it. Jane Elliott, Jane Elliott, Jane Elliott. Thank you so much.
Be a Jane instead of a Karen. Yeah, right. Oh
Yes,
my
be a
God.
Jane instead of a Karen. There we go.
Nancy Lamons and Jane Elliott.